The late afternoon sun cast long shadows across the weathered planks of Virginia City's train platform as Hannah Lewis stepped down from the dusty railcar, her leather-bound medical text clutched tightly to her chest. The spring air carried the mingled scents of coal smoke and river water, so different from the sterile hospital corridors she'd left behind in Boston. Her credentials as a trained nurse meant nothing now. She was simply another mail-order bride, answering the call of a frontier doctor seeking a suitable wife. The station master, a wizened man named David Wright, barely glanced up from his ledger as she approached. "Welcome to Virginia City, miss. If you're looking for Doc Young, his practice is 3 blocks down, just past the Riverfront Trading Company." His voice carried a note of practiced disinterest, as if mail-order brides were as common as freight shipments along the Missouri River. Hannah smoothed her travel-worn skirts and squared her shoulders, refusing to let uncertainty dim her resolve. She'd exchanged letters with Dr. Michael Young for 6 months, sharing her medical knowledge and dreams of establishing a proper clinic to serve the growing river community. His responses had been encouraging, even enthusiastic, until she'd mentioned her formal training at Massachusetts General Hospital. The walk to Dr. Young's office revealed a town caught between wilderness and civilization. Wooden sidewalks lined muddy streets where wagons competed with horses for space. The imposing brick facade of the Riverfront Trading Company dominated the waterfront, its weathered sign proclaiming, "Established 1853. Smaller shops and businesses clustered around it like children seeking shelter from the wild country beyond. Dr. Young's practice occupied a narrow clapboard building with peeling white paint and windows that hadn't seen soap in years. Hannah hesitated at the door, her heart pounding against her ribs. Through the grimy glass, she could see a man in a black coat bent over a desk, his shoulders tense as he scribbled in a patient ledger. This was the moment she'd traveled 2,000 miles to reach. The bell above the door announced her entrance with a discordant jangle. Dr. Young looked up, his expression shifting from professional interest to dismay as his eyes fell on the medical text she still held. "Miss Lewis, I presume?" His voice was cold, nothing like the warmth of his letters. "I'm afraid there's been a misunderstanding. I require a wife, not a colleague. Someone to maintain my home and social standing, not challenge my medical authority." Hannah felt the floor tilt beneath her feet as 6 months of correspondence and careful planning crumbled. "But your letters, you said my medical knowledge would be an asset." She fought to keep her voice steady, even as her vision blurred with unshed tears. "The town needs proper nursing care. You wrote that yourself." "I wrote what was necessary to secure a bride of good breeding," Dr. Young replied, his tone dismissive. "Had I known you actually practice medicine? Well, no matter now. I've already made other arrangements, more suitable ones." He turned back to his ledger, clearly considering the matter closed. "The evening stage to Santa Fe leaves at 6. I suggest you be on it." As Hannah stumbled back onto the street, a shadow fell across her path. She looked up to find a tall man in a trail-worn duster watching her with keen interest. A silver star glinted briefly beneath his coat as he shifted position. "Seems to me," he said quietly, "that a town growing as fast as Virginia City could use a properly trained nurse, especially with the riverboat traffic bringing new folks and new ailments every day." The stranger's name was John Harris, though she'd later learn he was better known along the frontier as Ghost Marshal, for his uncanny ability to appear wherever corruption took root. But in that moment, he was simply the first person in Virginia City to see her as more than a mail-order mistake. "I might know some people who'd appreciate your skills," he continued, "if you're interested in hearing more." Hannah studied his face, noting the intelligence in his eyes and the way he carried himself, alert but not threatening. 6 months of careful planning had just collapsed, leaving her stranded in a strange town with dwindling funds and wounded pride. Logic said to take the stage to Santa Fe. But something in John Harris's quiet offer whispered of opportunity and justice yet to come. Hannah smoothed her skirts and took a seat across from John Harris at the small table in the Riverfront Cafe. Through the window, she watched flatboats laden with cargo drift past on the muddy waters. The late afternoon sun caught the ripples, turning them to molten gold, a bitter reminder of the wedding band she'd expected to be wearing by now. Instead, her fingers remained bare, her future uncertain. "Tell me about these people who might appreciate my skills," she said, forcing her voice to remain steady. The cafe's other patrons seemed absorbed in their own conversations, but Hannah had already learned to be cautious in Virginia City. News traveled faster than the steamboats that churned up and down the river. John leaned forward slightly, his voice dropping. There's a settlement about 3 miles upriver, mostly families who've lost their land to questionable court decisions. Judge David Maxwell's decisions, to be precise. His jaw tightened almost imperceptibly at the name. They could use someone with medical training, someone discreet. The name struck a chord in Hannah's memory. 3 years ago, her father had mentioned a Judge Maxwell in one of his last letters before the accident that claimed both her parents. Something about land disputes along the river. She'd been too consumed with her medical studies in Boston to pay much attention at the time. These families, Hannah said carefully, they can't afford a doctor from town? She already knew the answer. She'd seen similar situations back east, where corrupt officials stripped honest people of everything they owned through legal manipulation. The town doctor won't treat them, says they're squatters with no legal right to be there. John's eyes met hers, and Hannah saw a carefully controlled anger there. But they're not squatters. They had deeds, documents, generations of history on that land. Until Maxwell started ruling in favor of certain business interests. Outside, a steamboat's whistle echoed across the water, and Hannah watched a flock of birds take flight from the willows along the bank. Her practical nature warred with her instincts. The logical choice was still the stage to Santa Fe, where she had a cousin who might take her in. But logic hadn't brought her west in the first place. Hope had done that. Hope and a desire to build something meaningful. My father was a lawyer in Laredo, she found herself saying. He specialized in land claims, particularly for families who'd worked their properties for generations. There was an accident, a fire in his office, all his cases, all the documentation. She trailed off, the memory still raw. John nodded slowly, understanding dawning in his expression. Maxwell's influence reaches far. Too far. The fire in Laredo 3 years ago wasn't the only convenient accident to destroy evidence against him. He pulled a worn leather notebook from his coat. I've been tracking his cases, his connections, building a case of my own. Hannah's medical training had taught her to observe details others might miss. The calluses on John's hands weren't those of a common gunslinger. The way he scanned the room spoke of formal training, not mere paranoia. You're not just offering me work with those families, are you? No, ma'am. I'm offering you a chance to help me expose the man who's been destroying lives up and down this river. Your medical skills would give you access, reasons to move freely between communities. And if you happen to hear things, see documents while treating people. He let the implication hang in the air. The sun had dipped lower, casting long shadows across the cafe's wooden floor. Hannah thought of her father's passionate belief in justice, her mother's constant reminder that education was meant to serve others. The mail-order rejection stung less now, replaced by a sense of purpose she hadn't felt since leaving Boston. Those families upriver, she said. When can I meet them? A ghost of a smile crossed John's face. I've got a boat ready, but first, there's something you should know about who I really am, and why Maxwell needs to be stopped. John leaned forward, his calloused hands wrapped around his coffee cup, as the evening shadows lengthened across the cafe. I was a federal marshal based in Virginia City, tracking a series of suspicious deaths along the river. Each victim had crossed paths with Judge Maxwell in some way, testified against his associates, refused to sell land, or simply asked too many questions about his business dealings. Hannah studied the man before her, noting how his shoulders tensed as he spoke. The weight of memory seemed to press down on him like a physical burden. Through the window, she could see riverboats moving slowly past, their wake catching the last golden rays of sunset. 3 years ago, my investigation led me to a warehouse in Santa Fe. Inside, I found ledgers proving Maxwell was taking bribes to rule in favor of certain land claims, pushing honest farmers off their properties. But before I could get the evidence to my superiors, the warehouse mysteriously burned down. The next day, my wife and daughter. His voice caught, and he took a moment before continuing. Their carriage accident wasn't an accident at all. The pieces began falling into place in Hannah's mind. The careful way he moved, always positioning himself to watch exits, the underlying tension in his voice when speaking of the judge. She thought of her own father's mysterious illness after challenging Maxwell's rulings in Laredo. "You gave up your badge to pursue him privately," she said softly. It wasn't a question. The cafe's oil lamps flickered to life as the proprietor made his evening rounds, casting dancing shadows on the walls. Had to. The corruption runs too deep for official channels. Rebecca Harris gripped the rough wooden railing of the riverboat as it approached the bustling port of Virginia City, her heart pounding with anticipation and lingering doubt. The crisp autumn air carried the mingled scents of wood smoke and muddy river water, while dock workers' shouts echoed across the water. Her credentials as a teacher from Boston's finest women's college now felt more like a burden than an achievement, especially after John Young's terse letter rejecting their arranged marriage due to her being unsuitably educated for frontier life. The riverboat's massive paddle wheel churned the murky waters as Rebecca gathered her meager belongings, 2 carpet bags containing books, clothing, and the few family mementos she'd managed to save after her father's death. The crushing weight of having nowhere to go and no family to return to pressed down on her shoulders as she watched the other passengers reunite with loved ones on the weathered dock. A tall figure in a dark duster coat caught her attention, standing apart from the crowd with an air of quiet vigilance. Matthew Wright had been observing the new arrivals with careful attention, his keen eyes noting every detail while maintaining his purposefully unremarkable presence among the dock workers and merchants. When he spotted Rebecca's solitary figure, something in her bearing, a mixture of refined determination and barely concealed desperation, triggered his lawman's instinct. She wasn't the typical mail-order bride, and her arrival coincided too perfectly with his investigation into Judge David King's corruption. The late afternoon sun cast long shadows across the bustling riverfront as Rebecca made her way toward the Riverside Hotel, acutely aware of being watched. Not just by the mysterious man in the duster, but by other eyes that seemed to track her progress through the crowded streets. The hotel clerk's expression shifted from polite interest to barely concealed hostility when she mentioned John Young's name, making it clear that word of her rejection had already spread through the close-knit river community. Matthew followed at a discreet distance, noting how the local townspeople's reactions to Rebecca varied from curiosity to outright suspicion. Judge King's influence ran deep in Virginia City, and anyone connected to John Young, the judge's former business partner turned bitter enemy, automatically drew unwanted attention. When 2 rough-looking men began trailing Rebecca more openly, Matthew's hand instinctively moved closer to his concealed weapon. Inside her modest hotel room, Rebecca unpacked her father's old leather journal, fingers tracing the damning evidence contained within its pages. Judge King's corruption had destroyed not just her family's shipping business back east, but countless others along the river network. Her father's suicide note had revealed the truth. It wasn't just business rivalry that had brought them down, but a calculated campaign of destruction orchestrated by the judge and his allies. The knock at her door made Rebecca freeze, her hand clutching the journal. Matthew's quiet voice carried through the wood, identifying himself as a friend of her father's. The moment she opened the door, she recognized something in his eyes, the same haunted determination she saw in her mirror each morning. He wore his gun with the unconscious ease of long practice, but it was the badge partially concealed inside his coat that truly caught her attention. "Your father was investigating the judge's river trafficking operation," Matthew said without preamble, his voice low and intense. "So was I, until they stripped my marshal's badge and murdered my partner." "John Young wasn't rejecting you. He was trying to protect you. The judge's men are already watching this hotel." The truth of his words was confirmed by the sound of heavy boots on the stairs outside. Rebecca's educational background proved invaluable as they pored over her father's coded journal entries late into the night, hiding in an abandoned warehouse by the river. Her knowledge of classical languages helped decipher the complex system her father had used to document Judge King's crimes. Matthew's experience with river law enforcement filled in the gaps, revealing a vast conspiracy of corruption that stretched from Virginia City to Santa Fe. The morning brought unwelcome visitors, Michael Lewis and Andrew Harris, the judge's most trusted enforcers, asking pointed questions about Rebecca throughout the riverfront district. Their practiced intimidation techniques sent merchants and dock workers scurrying for cover, but also revealed their desperation. Something in that journal had the judge worried enough to abandon his usual subtle approach to dealing with threats. Hidden in the warehouse's dusty office, Rebecca and Matthew pieced together the larger picture. Her father's shipping company hadn't been randomly targeted. It had been one of several legitimate businesses the judge had systematically destroyed to maintain control of river commerce. The evidence suggested a pattern of corruption stretching back decades, with tentacles reaching into territorial governments and federal offices. As sunset painted the river in shades of amber and gold, Rebecca watched Matthew checking his weapons with methodical precision. The former marshal's quiet competence should have been reassuring, but instead highlighted the devastating consequences of opposing the judge. Her father's fate, and that of Matthew's partner, served as stark reminders of what awaited those who challenged David King's authority. Yet something stronger than fear drove them both forward: the need to restore their family's honor and protect others from suffering the same fate. The riverfront warehouse district grew treacherous after dark, with shadows concealing potential threats from Judge King's men. Rebecca carefully transcribed shipping manifests by lamplight while Matthew maintained watch near the window, his silhouette a reassuring presence against the star-studded sky. The evidence they had gathered painted an intricate web of corruption, but they needed more to bring down someone as powerful as King. A soft knock at the rear door made them both freeze. Matthew drew his revolver soundlessly, but relaxed slightly when a familiar voice whispered, "It's Grace." Rebecca opened the door to find the young telegraph operator clutching a stack of papers, her face pale in the dim light. As King's personal secretary, Grace had access to sensitive documents and the courage to risk everything by sharing them. "He's calling in favors from Virginia City," Grace reported, spreading coded telegrams across the desk. "3 hired guns arriving on tomorrow's riverboat. And there's something else. He's ordered the sheriff to arrest Matthew on site for interference with territorial commerce." Her hands trembled as she sorted the papers, but her voice remained steady. The danger she faced daily to help them required extraordinary bravery. Matthew studied the telegrams intently, his expression hardening. "These men, I know them from my marshal days. Professional killers. All of them. King's not taking chances anymore." He glanced at Rebecca. "We need to move soon, before he brings in more muscle. But first we have to get word to my contact in Santa Fe. He has documents proving King's connection to the Laredo land grab scandal." Rebecca felt a familiar surge of determination. "I can help with that. The summer social is tomorrow night. All of King's allies will be there, including his new business partner from Amarillo. If I attend as planned, no one will suspect I'm passing information." She met Matthew's concerned gaze. "I know the risks, but we're running out of time and options." Grace touched Rebecca's arm. "Be careful. King's been asking questions about you. Why you're still in town after John rejected the marriage arrangement. He's suspicious of educated women who don't fit his idea of proper behavior." The warning carried weight coming from someone who witnessed the judge's cruelty firsthand. The night deepened as they refined their strategy. Matthew would use Grace's warning to avoid the sheriff while making contact with allies downriver. Rebecca would maintain her social obligations, gathering intelligence while appearing to seek new marriage prospects. The charade felt hollow, given her growing feelings for Matthew, but survival demanded focus on their mission. Dawn found them preparing to separate, each to play their part in the dangerous game. Rebecca watched Matthew check his spare ammunition one final time, his movements precise despite exhaustion. When he looked up, the intensity in his eyes made her breath catch. "If anything feels wrong at that social, you get out immediately. Promise me." His voice carried an edge of something beyond professional concern. She nodded, understanding the unspoken weight between them. "I promise. But you be careful too. Grace's warning about the sheriff worries me." Rebecca hesitated, then impulsively squeezed his hand. The brief contact sent warmth through her, despite the morning chill. They had started as unlikely allies united by tragedy, but somewhere along the way, everything had changed. As Rebecca slipped away through the misty streets toward her boarding house, her mind raced with preparations for the evening ahead. She would need every bit of her finishing school polish to maintain the facade while hunting evidence against King. The same education that had cost her a husband might now help save lives, including that of the man who had become far more important to her than any mail-order marriage could have been. The sun climbed higher, burning away the river fog and revealing a town moving through its morning routines, unaware of the gathering storm. In his chambers, Judge King would be reviewing cases, dispensing his twisted version of justice while plotting to maintain his grip on the territory. But his reign was about to face its greatest challenge from the very people he had tried to destroy. Rebecca straightened her shoulders, ready to play her part in bringing him down, not just for her father now, but for all those who had suffered under King's corrupt rule. The morning sun cast long shadows across the weathered boardwalk as Hannah Lewis and Matthew Harris crouched behind overturned tables at the Silver Dollar Saloon. Judge David Wright's men had them pinned down, their bullets splintering the wooden barriers. Hannah's hands trembled as she reloaded her father's old Remington, the scholarly life she'd known in Virginia City feeling like a distant dream now. Matthew pressed his back against the table, his marshal's badge glinting dully beneath his coat. "Those documents you found in Wright's office, they prove he's been taking bribes from the river merchants to rule against honest farmers. It's the same scheme he used to destroy my family's ranch 10 years ago." His voice carried equal measures of pain and determination. Through the window, Hannah could see the muddy waters of the river where Wright's steamboat waited, loaded with gold from his years of corruption. The same gold that should have gone to families like hers before the judge's false ruling had stripped them of their water rights and forced her father to drink himself to death. Rebecca Young, the saloon owner who'd become Hannah's closest friend since arriving as a spurned mail-order bride 3 months ago, called out from behind the bar. "There's a back exit through the kitchen. I can create a distraction while you two make for the courthouse." Her loyalty meant everything. She'd lost her own brother to Wright schemes. The air grew thick with gun smoke as Matthew's carefully laid trap began to unfold. John King, the telegraph operator they'd recruited, would be sending word to the federal marshals in Santa Fe right now. But they had to survive long enough for help to arrive. And more importantly, they had to secure those documents before Wright could destroy them. Hannah's mind raced back to the night Matthew had revealed his true identity, not just some mysterious gunslinger, but a former marshal who'd spent years building a case against Wright. The pieces had fallen into place. Why he'd stepped in to protect her when her intended husband rejected her. Why he seemed to know so much about the judge's activities. "We need to split up," Matthew whispered, his eyes meeting hers with an intensity that made her breath catch. "I'll draw their fire toward the livery. You circle around through Rebecca's distraction and get to that courthouse safe. The combination is Wright's daughter's birthday, May 15th. The trust in his voice filled Hannah with determination. A bullet struck dangerously close, sending splinters flying. Through the chaos, Hannah caught sight of Wright himself on the balcony of his mansion across the street, watching the battle unfold with cold calculation. The man who'd destroyed so many lives, who'd turned the river trade into his personal empire of corruption, who'd robbed her of both family and future. Rebecca's voice cut through the gunfire. "Now, they're reloading." She hurled several bottles of her finest whiskey through the front windows, the explosions of glass and liquid creating momentary confusion. Hannah locked eyes with Matthew one last time, saw in them everything they'd come to mean to each other, then sprinted for the kitchen door as he laid down covering fire. The morning air hit her face as she emerged into the alley, her skirts gathered up as she ran. The courthouse loomed ahead, its imposing stone facade a monument to Wright's abuse of power. But today, that power would end. She had her father's spirit, Matthew's training, and the truth itself on her side. Justice would finally flow like the river that had brought her here. The shots behind her grew more intense as Matthew led Wright's men on their wild chase. Hannah silently thanked Providence for bringing her, not the husband she'd expected, but the partner she'd needed. Together, they would expose Wright's corruption and restore honor to both their families. She reached the courthouse steps, head held high, ready to face whatever came next. Wright's voice suddenly boomed from his balcony, carrying across the chaos of the street. "Harris, I killed your father for interfering, and I'll kill you too." The raw hatred in his words confirmed everything, but Matthew's answering shot struck true, sending the judge ducking for cover. Hannah smiled grimly. Some confessions came from the most unexpected places. Inside the courthouse, her footsteps echoed through empty halls as she made her way to Wright's chamber. The safe waited behind a painting of the river, just as Matthew had described. Her fingers, steady now, spun the dial to the numbers that would unlock not just the metal door, but redemption itself. For her father, for Matthew's family, for everyone Wright had wronged. The sound of the tumblers clicking into place was like music. Hannah swung the heavy door open, found the damning documents exactly where their informant had said they'd be. Contracts, letters, bank drafts, a paper trail of corruption that would send Wright to prison for life. She carefully tucked them into her bodice, then froze at the sound of boots in the doorway. I must admit you've surprised me, Miss Lewis. Andrew Wright, the judge's son, leveled his pistol at her chest. Father always said educated women were dangerous. His finger tightened on the trigger, but a sudden shot rang out, and he crumpled forward, revealing Rebecca Young standing behind him with a smoking derringer. Some of us are more dangerous than others, Rebecca said with a grim smile. Now let's get those papers somewhere safe before the rest of Wright's men figure out where you are. The two women hurried from the office, their footsteps echoing through the halls of justice that would soon mean something again. Outside, the gunfire had intensified. Hannah clutched the precious documents as she and Rebecca made their way toward the river, where Michael Harris, Matthew's younger brother, waited with a small boat. They would get the evidence to the federal authorities in Laredo, while Matthew kept Wright's attention focused on the town. Hannah's heart ached at leaving Matthew behind, but she knew this was their best chance. The truth about Wright's corruption would finally come to light, and both their families' honor would be restored. The river that had brought her here as a mail-order bride would now carry her toward justice, and eventually back to the man who had helped her find her true purpose. The late afternoon sun cast long shadows across Silver Creek's main street as Judge Wright's men surrounded the courthouse, their rifles trained on every exit. Matthew stood at the upper window, watching Hannah and Rebecca disappear into the willows along the riverbank. His jaw tightened as he checked his ammunition. He'd have to hold Wright's attention long enough for them to reach Laredo with the evidence. Down below, Wright's voice boomed through a megaphone. Harris, you're making a grave mistake protecting that woman. Come out now, and we can discuss terms like civilized men. Matthew's bitter laugh echoed in the empty chamber. The last time Wright had offered terms, Matthew's father had ended up face down in the river, his reputation in tatters. The first volley of shots splintered the window frame, sending Matthew diving for cover. He returned fire strategically, not aiming to kill but to keep them pinned down. Through the chaos, he caught glimpses of familiar faces, men he'd once called friends, now corrupted by Wright's influence and money. The acrid smell of gunpowder filled his nostrils as he moved from window to window, making them think there were more defenders inside. Miles downstream, Hannah and Rebecca huddled in Michael's boat as he expertly navigated the swift current. The precious documents were sealed in an oilskin pouch, protected from the river's spray. Hannah's thoughts kept returning to Matthew, remembering how different he'd seemed from the rough men she'd first encountered in Silver Creek. His quiet strength had given her courage when she'd found herself alone and unwanted. "We've got company!" Michael's urgent whisper cut through her reverie. Two boats had appeared behind them, cutting through the water with determined speed. Rebecca pulled out her rifle, but Michael shook his head. "Save your shots. We'll lose them in Devil's Canyon. The current's too treacherous for anyone who doesn't know it like I do." The canyon walls rose around them, the river narrowing and accelerating. Michael guided them through the rapids with practiced skill, while their pursuers fell further behind, unwilling to risk the dangerous passage at such speed. Hannah gripped the gunwale, her knuckles white, as they emerged into calmer waters. Back in Silver Creek, Matthew had worked his way to the courthouse roof. The setting sun silhouetted him against the darkening sky as he watched Wright's men preparing for a final assault. A movement caught his eye. Andrew, his oldest friend, signaling from behind the livery stable. The town wasn't as firmly under Wright's control as the judge believed. Flames suddenly erupted from the warehouse where Wright stored his illegal goods. The judge's men scattered in confusion, torn between maintaining the siege and protecting their employer's interests. Matthew seized the moment, climbing down the back of the building where Andrew waited with two saddled horses. "Victoria's got the telegraph office," Andrew reported as they rode hard toward the river. "She's already sent messages to every marshal between here and Laredo. Wright won't be able to stop the truth now." Matthew nodded grimly, hoping Hannah and the others had enough of a head start. The night deepened as they followed the river's course, guided by the stars and their knowledge of the territory. They'd grown up along these banks, learned its moods and secrets. Now those same waters were carrying their hopes for justice, along with the woman who had unexpectedly become central to Matthew's future. Dawn was breaking as they approached Laredo, the river widening and slowing in its final stretch. They found Michael's boat hidden exactly where they'd planned, but signs of a struggle surrounded it. Matthew's heart clenched until he spotted the signal mark Hannah and he had agreed upon. 3 parallel lines carved fresh into a nearby tree. They were alive, and the documents were safe. In the growing light, they could see movement at the federal marshal's office. Through his spyglass, Matthew recognized Hannah's figure standing beside a tall man in a marshal's coat. She'd done it, delivered the evidence that would bring right down. Now it was time to return to Silver Creek and face whatever justice awaited, not just for their family's honor, but for the future they might build together. The morning sun cast long shadows across Virginia City's courthouse steps as Hannah Lewis stood beside Matthew Wright, both of them steeled for the confrontation ahead. The former marshal's steady presence had become her anchor over these past weeks, so different from their initial wary encounter when he'd first offered his protection. Now they shared not just a mission, but an unspoken understanding born of parallel losses. Judge David King sat behind his imposing oak desk, his carefully cultivated appearance of respectability betrayed by the cold calculation in his eyes. "Miss Lewis, I'm surprised to see you pursuing these allegations. A woman of your education should know better than to meddle in legal affairs." His words dripped with condescension, but Hannah refused to flinch. Matthew stepped forward, placing a stack of documents on the judge's desk. "These records from the Harris family estate prove you deliberately mishandled their inheritance, Your Honor, the same way you manipulated my father's trading contracts 10 years ago." His voice was quiet but carried an edge sharp as a razor. The judge's face paled as he recognized the damning evidence. Outside, the muddy waters of the river churned past the town's busy docks, a constant reminder of the commerce that had drawn both their families here generations ago. Hannah thought of her grandfather's riverboat business, now nothing but weathered ledgers and faded memories thanks to King's machinations. She'd come seeking a fresh start through marriage, only to find herself caught in a web of old injustices. "You won't leave this office alive," King snarled, reaching for a hidden drawer. But Matthew was faster, his years of law enforcement experience evident in his fluid motion as he drew his weapon. "Don't," he warned. "The days of you destroying lives are over." Hannah's heart pounded as she kept her own small derringer trained on the corrupt judge. The sound of boots on the courthouse steps announced the arrival of Andrew Young, the town's current marshal, along with 2 deputies. Hannah had worried he might be in King's pocket, but Matthew's careful groundwork had convinced the lawman to investigate independently. Now Young's grim expression confirmed he'd found his own evidence of the judge's crimes. "David King, you're under arrest for corruption, fraud, and conspiracy," Young declared. As the deputies moved to take the judge into custody, King lunged desperately for his weapon. The crack of gunfire echoed through the chamber. Hannah watched in horror as both Matthew and King crumpled to the floor, their blood mingling on the polished wooden boards. The next hours passed in a blur of activity. Town Dr. Michael Harris worked to save both men while Hannah paced the clinic's porch, her mind racing between prayers and memories. She thought of her first meeting with Matthew, how his quiet strength had drawn her even as his mysterious past raised questions. Now she understood why he'd recognized her family name, why he'd felt compelled to help. When Dr. Harris finally emerged, his expression was somber but relieved. "Matthew will recover, though it'll take time." The judge wasn't so fortunate. Hannah felt no joy at King's death, only a weary acceptance that justice, however imperfect, had finally been served. The weight of generations of wrongs began to lift from her shoulders. Recovery brought changes to Virginia City. With King's corruption exposed, many old cases were reopened. The Harris family's river trading routes were restored to their rightful owners, and Matthew's father's name was cleared. Hannah found herself busy helping to sort through years of tangled records, her education proving invaluable in untangling the judge's schemes. As autumn painted the riverbank trees in gold and crimson, Matthew and Hannah stood together on the dock where her grandfather's boats had once moored. "I never expected to find peace here," she admitted, watching a trading vessel glide past. "I came looking for a husband and found justice instead." Matthew's hand found hers, warm and steady as the current below. "Maybe you found both," he said softly. Hannah smiled, remembering the scandalized whispers when she'd first arrived, too educated for a frontier bride. Now she understood that education had been her weapon, as vital as Matthew's gun in their fight for justice. Together, they'd restored their family's legacies while building something new. The river continued its eternal journey as Hannah and Matthew planned their future. They would rebuild the Harris-Lewis Trading Company, combining her business acumen with his understanding of law and justice. Virginia City was changing, growing beyond its corrupt past into something better, and they would change with it, their shared wounds healing into strength. Years later, people would still tell the story of the educated bride and the former marshal who brought down a corrupt judge. But Hannah knew the true story was more complex. A tale of family honor, unexpected allies, and the courage to seek justice no matter the cost. The river had brought her here for a reason, and she'd finally found her place in its flow. As autumn painted the riverbanks in amber and gold, Hannah and Matthew's plans for the rebuilt Harris Lewis Trading Company took shape along Virginia City's bustling waterfront. The old warehouse, once a symbol of corruption under Judge Andrews' reign, was transformed into their headquarters, its weathered timbers reinforced with fresh pine that carried the sweet scent of new beginnings. Hannah's ledgers and Matthew's legal documents shared space on sturdy oak shelves, a testament to their complementary strengths. The river trade flourished under their guidance, with honest merchants returning to Virginia City's docks. Former rivals who had once feared Andrews' influence now sought partnerships, drawn by Hannah's reputation for fair dealings and Matthew's unwavering integrity. They established new trading routes connecting to Santa Fe, creating opportunities for families who had previously been shut out by the judge's monopolies. Rebecca, who had initially rejected Hannah as her mail-order bride, found herself working as their company's representative in Laredo. Her prejudices about educated women had dissolved in the face of Hannah's success, and she now proudly handled negotiations with Mexican traders, her own talents finally finding purpose. The irony of their reversed positions was not lost on either woman, but they had forged a friendship stronger than their awkward beginning. Word spread along the river networks of the changes in Virginia City. Merchants who had abandoned the town during Andrews' corruption returned, bringing with them tales of other communities seeking similar transformation. Matthew's experience as a federal marshal proved invaluable as they established protocols to prevent future corruption, while Hannah's business education created systems of transparency that became a model for river trading posts throughout the territory. On quiet evenings, they would sit on their riverside porch, watching the sunset paint the water in shades of purple and orange. Hannah would often read from her beloved books, her voice carrying across the water as Matthew cleaned his gun. No longer needed for vengeance, but maintained out of respect for the justice it had helped deliver. They had transformed their shared pain into something meaningful, their scars becoming markers of survival rather than suffering. The Harris Lewis Trading Company expanded to include a school for merchants' children, housed in a bright building near the docks. Hannah taught business principles alongside traditional subjects, while Matthew offered lessons in law and ethics. They were building more than a business. They were cultivating a community that valued both education and integrity, proving that the two were not mutually exclusive on the frontier. As their influence grew, they received an unexpected letter from Grace, Andrew's widow, who had settled in Amarillo after her husband's downfall. She wrote of her own journey toward redemption, teaching other women to read and write, inspired by Hannah's example. The letter reminded them that justice could heal as well as punish, and that change could ripple outward in unexpected ways. The river continued its ancient journey, but its waters now carried different stories, tales of restoration rather than corruption, of learning rather than ignorance, of love found in unexpected places. Hannah and Matthew's legacy grew beyond their personal vindication, becoming part of the river's own story, a reminder that even the deepest wounds could be healed by the flowing waters of time and truth. Their marriage, celebrated on the riverbank where they had first plotted their justice, became a symbol of Virginia City's transformation. The ceremony combined Hannah's refined Eastern sensibilities with frontier traditions, much like their partnership had merged seemingly opposing worlds into something stronger than either could have been alone. The river carried their vows downstream, spreading their story to other settlements seeking their own paths to justice and renewal. As the years flowed by like the endless river, Hannah and Matthew's influence extended beyond trade and justice. They became known as advisors and mediators, their home a sanctuary for those seeking to right wrongs or build honest enterprises. Their story was told and retold along the river's course, not as a tale of revenge, but as proof that education and integrity could coexist with frontier strength, and that true justice required both the head and the heart.